Well, Phil, I have a very long record in believing that a team losing 5-1 against Vancouver is honestly a sign of a noble effort. It's something that I have a record reflecting, and I think that's borne out this week.
So 5-1 is a score line that Austin lost to Vancouver by. Miami also, in a way, lost to Vancouver 5-1 in the CONCACAF Champions Cup semifinals. But what took Austin only 90 minutes to do, it took Miami a full 180 minutes. But by God, they did it. They really did. They went out in spectacular fashion. Got to enjoy some of that game with my daughter, number one Vancouver Whitecaps fan in Austin. Did she grab her foam finger after the first goal and want it replayed? Maybe. Did I snap a photo of her with said foam finger in front of sad Miami player on the TV? I might have done that as well. Yeah, just a completely enjoyable team. It makes me wonder what it's like to watch a consistently enjoyable team week after week.
Emergency podcast. Better did a thing, so we gotta talk about it. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, oh yeah, shut up, oh yeah, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
Hey, a hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, the Austin FC podcast, where we talk about all the Austin FC emergencies, including it's May. We're here. We're in month of many soccer matches. Moises, how are you bracing for 8 or possibly 9 soccer matches in this 31-day span starting tomorrow? So really, it's a 28-day span.
I mean, I'm fully unclenched and accepting of whatever is coming. What other choice do we have really than to just center ourselves, find our breath, make sure that we've done our morning yoga so that we can manifest whatever there is to be manifested and manifest whatever needs to be manifested after the unexpected swirling of the universe defies what we may want. It's a lot of soccer. It's a lot of home and away soccer, roughly evenly split, depending on how the theoretical additional fixture would end up going, because it could be a home or an away fixture. But at the moment, it is almost even home and away, just a little bit lopsided in favor of home fixtures, which is good for Austin fans. You would think, you would hope, but who knows what happens in the chaos of a new coach season. As many things as we would like to ascribe to the typicality of a certain thing, when you get a new coach, you have no idea what's going to happen, and the narrative plays itself out over the course of that whole season. So could May rocket Austin to the top of the West somehow, magically, mysteriously, because there's so many fixtures in play? Could it throw them into the Supporter Shield conversation? It really could, and not just in a quote unquote mathematically possible way. I think that's going to be our first t-shirt, Phil. Mathematically possible. Just the words mathematically possible.
I love it.
Who else would make that shirt? That's how I feel about May. Is not really apprehension, not really excitement, apprecitement, excapprehension, some mixture of the two, a liminal state from which I may never return.
Okay. In case you have not looked at the calendar, and in case you have not looked at the Austin FC schedule, I can't imagine you listening to the show and not having done that. But for those of you who might have, just let's just kind of lay the magnitude of this on everybody here, gathered here together to take in all this soccer. So obviously, as you're listening to this will be tonight, 7:30 p.m. Strangely, it's a 7:30 start. Look at that. We're back to those. And that's against Minnesota United FC, of course. And then Wednesday, El Paso Locomotive comes to town for the U.S. Open Cup round of 32. Then, with very little rest, Austin goes to Cincinnati, one of the top teams in the East. Then 4 days later, on the 14th, they are back in Q2 to face Atlanta United, which is, again, stop me if you've heard this one before, highly rated at the start, thought to be one of the better teams in the East, and then having a somewhat disappointing season. And then 3 days after that, Austin is hosting again, this time the aforementioned Vancouver Whitecaps FC, most fun team in MLS, most fun team in the hemisphere right now, going to be playing in the CCC final against Cruz Azul in Mexico City in not Azteca, as we know that stadium. And then Minnesota again, but that is in St. Paul. That is on May 24th. And then Austin is hosting.
However,
Oh,
in the Philippe sense, different Philippe, but also a guy named Philippe, there could be something in between those fixtures, couldn't there, Phil?
There could indeed. That would be
Wednesday, the 21st. Provided Austin wins against El Paso Locomotive, their next Open Cup game would be against either Phoenix or Houston, and which opponent it is will determine home or away. If it's Phoenix, it's away. If it's Houston, it's home. I have that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So they're potentially looking at hosting Vancouver, then traveling to Phoenix, then traveling to Minnesota, which seems like a lot of travel. Then May 28th, they host Real Salt Lake. And then finally, to close out the month, they go to San Diego, potentially the most fun away trip of away trips this year. And then they're back to a quote unquote regular weekly schedule. And in there in June, there's also a international break. So they have 8, possibly 9 games in May, and then they've got 3 games in June. So they're front loading here a little bit. Kind of crazy. So your expectations are that this could possibly rocket them to the top of the West. What are your realistic expectations? Is that just like a hopeful projection?
We've talked about MLS, and others have said this too. It's not unique to us. MLS is a very streaky league. It lives and dies on streaks. That kind of momentum really makes things work. A team that people would count out suddenly goes on a heater and then ends up in the Western Conference Final at the end of 2022. Can anybody think of what I'm talking about there? There are those kinds of narratives in MLS, and there have been over its entire almost 30-year history. My feeling about May is that it is not the easiest schedule. You got to say, as you pointed out already, what could happen, though, is some magic from those midweeks. Atlanta United at midweek is an ideal way to come back home after being on the road to Cincinnati in what I feel it's not unreasonable to think it's totally reasonable to think that's going to be an away loss. A draw, I would consider a win. A point away against Cincinnati in the form that they're in currently, I think that would be totally respectable. And frankly, a loss against them away is also totally respectable. The Open Cupness of Open Cup, that is going to drain some stamina for sure. But I feel like El Paso Locomotive, as motivated as they are to cups at the MLS team, that one's got to be a win for Austin. It's got to be a reputational win, if nothing else. And then whatever way the dice roll, either it is a revenge fixture against Houston at home, or it is an away fixture against a really pretty solid USL side in Phoenix Rising. That makes for that game on the 21st being pretty interesting, and will say a lot about just how serious Austin really is about making a deep cup run in Open Cup this year. That's the stuff that I had in the back of my head, but I wanted to spring this on you, knowing that we have tight schedule, and also we want to turn this around quickly and get this out to people. I want to rapid fire through those fixtures and put Phil on the spot. We'll call this Ask Phil West, whether on a recurring basis or literally just this time. I want you to give your snap
I may have
judgment.
already prepared for this. For this.
You've got to be kidding me. Okay, Phil, I'm going to take you through game show style.
Let's do it.
And you win no matter what your answers are. Isn't that beautiful? Okay. This Saturday at home against Minnesota, what's happening?
Draw. It's a draw.
El Paso Locomotive Open Cup.
That's a win.
Okay. Away against Cincinnati.
That is a loss.
Home against Atlanta United, possibly Josh Wolf's next team, because I don't think they're going to keep that coach.
That's a win.
Home against the Vancouver Whitecap Cougars.
That is a loss. Vancouver's just too good right now.
Okay, let's split the multiverse. May 21st, away against Phoenix Rising.
That's a win.
At home against Houston Dynamo.
I'm going to say that's also a win. I feel maybe a deep cup run in this team.
Okay. Flipping the loony on the other side, away against Minnesota.
I think that's a loss.
At home against RSL.
That's a win.
and away against San Diego, the most looked forward to, most hyped Austin fan away day of the season so far.
I think that's a draw. So that would leave them with 8 of 21 points in league, 2-3-2, and then into, I guess that would be the quarterfinals of the Open Cup.
And how do you feel about that?
I don't feel great. I feel pretty solid about my predictions, unless, again, Robert Taylor magic. He just came to town this week. We'll talk about him in a second. But yeah, I feel like this is going to be a really tough stretch. I think there are some really good teams that Austin's facing. And after the Houston loss, they could, again, we talk about this proverbial dam breaking with goals and all that. But at this point, I'm not seeing it, and I'm not seeing the kind of creation in the midfield that this team needs in order to be able to score. And I think while Taylor will be helpful, Pereira being out for now, 4 to 8 weeks with a hip flexor. It was not a quad as Estevez originally thought on Saturday post-match. Hip flexor sounds bad. It sounds like it's a grade 2, so it doesn't require surgery, which is good, but it is going to take a while to recover, and a lot of it is just going to depend on his resilience, and obviously a lot of Call of Duty probably in his future, so over the next few weeks. But yeah, he's someone that they could probably use in the stretch. This is going to be brutal. These are a lot of Saturday Wednesdays, and and there's less depth than ideally there should be at this point.
Well, on the other side of May, we've got to come back on the Phil picks and see whether the over or the under won. The two things I wanted to throw in that I think could be interesting game changers are, I think there may be some underestimation as to how much of an asset Dessler is going to be when he does come back. Even as bullish as many people are on how valuable he is and how helpful he's going to be, that is a guy who's got revenge on his mind for the games he hasn't been allowed to play. And the other is, I think with potentially 2 Open Cup games, I think maybe we see some first team minutes for Irvin Torres. And that could be a very interesting opportunity for them to give him to show what he is worth. We saw Stephen Cleveland start in the most recent Austin FC 2 game prior to
How'd that go?
Tonight's Scared Money Derby. The game didn't go so well. Didn't go so well. But if you are looking at things through the Burrell lens, that's what you use your second team for. It is a developmental league, and you want to let him get that out of the way before it actually matters in a cup competition for your first team that you actually care about overall as an operation. At least that's the logic that would make sense to me.
I did like that Utley had his pick of players who didn't play any first team minutes. Yeah, which is great. let's get an MLS grade goalkeeper in there. I still remember the time Maxime Crepeau came to Parmer Field. And
got heckled by children. Maxime Crepeau, MLS Cup winning goalkeeper, heckled
World Cup
goalkeeper, heckled by children at Parmer Field. Either you were there or you weren't. And I'm telling you, you missed out if you weren't. We got to move things right along. Yes, Phil?
Yep, we do. We do. So let me throw a trio of depressing numbers at you.
Oh no.
Yeah. So I had more than one person tell me this week that my Tuesday article on Murdo Zuni and the big kind of deep dive I did statistically, that they saw that it was there, but they could not bring themselves to read it. So again, remember that 99th percentile is the best in these charts, and the first percentile is the worst. Azuni is currently 2nd percentile in progressive passes received among all forwards in MLS through the 2025 season so far. 2nd percentile in touches and 5th percentile in non-penalty goals. These are not good numbers. Right?
Yeah,
they're not good numbers for anybody, but especially for a DP.
That's, tell you what, just hearing those numbers, not even looking at charts, not even looking at graphical representations of said charts, does not inspire confidence.
No. And I think the real key number in that, and again, this is going to bring us back to kind of thinking about the midfield, is that progressive passes received, right? Again, there's been some really interesting work that I've seen this week. The ASA folks, they've been looking at how goals get made. You know, obviously progressive passes, through balls, those are things that are most effective. And we're not getting maybe as many of those to Azuni or to the other players as we would perhaps want or need or like.
I feel like, tagging on from what we just moved on from, another thing that I was holding is May is not a reset point, but this is bringing in more data point opportunity for Uzuni, where those numbers that admittedly do not look good, he's got 8, if not 9 games to mess with those metrics. And to me, I think they, as fearful as people may be to open that email that article is in, I would encourage people to look at it, because I feel like one way or another, we are really going to see what is going on with this particular DP this season based on the way that the next 8 or 9 games play out. That's where all the numbers are. What I would say in this supplementary commentary that we do every week after the club has thankfully sent us different press releases and short-term agreements and that kind of thing, literally minutes before or minutes into our recording, is that I think that a piece of this is very psychological. It is very high performance coaching related, where as we have seen in talking to him, I've been joking, but honestly serious too, about him having the bearing of the Incredible Hulk, where it is mental smash ball into net.
Yes.
And it really is, he is so incredibly focused. He is so incredibly dedicated. He really wants to do this. It's not for lack of wanting. And I think that where this is it's not that he's not talented. It's not that he's not capable. It's not that he has somehow had a falling out with teammates that he's known for 2 months. I think that it is entirely setting a totally achievable standard for himself, but with the wrong thing behind it, of the, there is no reason that I should be doing this. So every time he misses a shot, every time he does not get in the right place at the right time, he lets it land way, way, way harder than he should. We've seen those pounding the ground kind of thing. Save that for 3/4 of the way through the season, my dude. Not a third of the way into the season. That's what I think is really the biggest issue, aside from, of course, the underlying numbers.
Yeah, I talk about this in the article too, just the kind of body language concerns, right? So after he had that miss on his best chance of the game against Houston, rather than trying to get back towards goal, he puts his hands on his head and he kind of wheels off to the side, and then is there as kind of like a quasi outlet pass, but isn't really involved with the play at that point anymore. And then once Sabovic turns it over, which invariably happens like about 20-25 seconds later after that initial shot, again, hands on head, like just in disbelief. And I get the frustration, but also, you know, dude, you're in the middle of the game. Like, it reminds me of Dreesy reactions from last year. And that's really concerning. That's not what we want to see out of a DP, any DP.
You know, 2 guys wearing the same number in different seasons and having some of the same high performance anxiety. That's the concern for me. So yeah, that's the secret, folks. Yeah, the scary numbers are in there, but also Phil analyzing the body language. So if you needed that teaser to make you want to click open on that email, click open on the email. It's not that scary. What would be scary, however, is if we get to the other side of May and we're looking at something similar, where there has not been that psychological course correction.
Yeah. And again, like with my projection of 8 points in 21 games, we're going to be at the halfway point of the season after that San Diego game at the end of the month. They would still be on 24 points. They would still have 1.41 points per game. That would land them about 48 points, which probably puts them, I would say, 7th or 8th in the West, just projecting where things are at. And the West is not great this year. Like, the best teams all seem to be in the East. There are some exceptions, obviously, but very few, right? And you've got Vancouver, and then you've basically got everybody else in the conference. So they could still, and again, this is the advantage of banking points early, right? And we might look back heading into decision day where, Austin probably makes the playoffs, and unless they totally fall on their face in this scenario. And we'll look at the win at LAFC, and we'll look at the win at St. Louis as being incredibly important and probably saving the season. It's obviously too early to make those kind of projections, but I do have a feeling that banking those early points away was incredibly helpful to, first of all, where Austin is now, which is still 3rd in the conference, which is weird, just given everything that we're talking about and fretting, but also just that they do yeah, that they did get those. And again, when you think about the performance that you have to have away, getting 2 big away wins against at least one of those is going to be a playoff team. So I do think that's good. That's important that they've done that. But yeah, I'm worried about the stretch, quite frankly, especially the away matches.
A couple of things come to mind as we're marbling together. Like we can't help but talk about Mizuni and DP production, but drift back into May because that's really what's overhanging all of this, and that'll also bleed into when we get into talking about Robert Taylor. But something that comes to mind is that as unfortunate it is to be without Danny Pereira for 4 to 8 weeks, a fantastic player, very crucial, and who has had some missteps, but has been picking himself back up and figuring stuff out. Knowing that he and Uzuni have gotten really tight as besties, maybe it helps for there to be less of that security blanket aspect to having a bestie buddy that is actively training, actively playing with him in midfield, forcing him to have to link up better with Owen, have to link up better with other players, because we saw how there was just nothing going to him in that Houston game. He's got to figure that out. That's not folks freezing him out. That is, there's some two-way street action going on there. The other thing that comes to mind as you're talking about this being a rough stretch, something I would be fascinated to look at analytically is May is typically a pretty stacked month because there's always that international break in June, and there's a lot of match loading in the month of May.
Yeah.
I would be curious to see the proportion of actual wins, losses versus draws in, say, the last 5 years of MLS Mays, and what would favor Austin having banked those wins that were not expected to be wins by many people, is if we end up seeing a lot of draws in the Western Conference. If we see a lot of point stagnation, that vastly benefits your Vancouvers, your Austins, your Minnesotas, frankly. And that's something that if that kind of exhaustion setting in, because everybody across the league is overloaded with whether the recovery from CONCACAF, the last stages of CONCACAF Champions Cup leading into May, or also being an Open Cup in addition to everything that they otherwise have going on in May. That's something that could help buffer that low overall point total is if everybody else is stagnating. And that isn't to say that's a reason to celebrate, but that could provide some insulation that will make a low overall point total. Look, if nobody's doing particularly well, scoring a few wins is a pretty big deal in making it through the gauntlet.
Yeah. Yeah. So Robert Taylor, two things that kind of encourage me about him is, first of all, he did get to hold Pollo after meeting the fans on the Tuesday kind of meet and greet. Yeah, it was weird. It was just Murga was out on the stage at Live Oak Park, and then all of a sudden staff member brings Robert out and the band is playing, and then he watches them and somebody hands him a megaphone, and then he says some pleasant things to the crowd for about a minute or so, and then they play more songs, and then he takes a bunch of pictures. He did some juggling, and then someone gave him Pollo, and I told him that chicken's been places, because Pollo certainly has. And Robert's like, I love it. He's really into it. So I think he's bought into the fan culture and all that. And like you said, Thursday to media, we like to play pretty aggressive attacking football, which really fits my style. He's saying of his new team, I like to run in behind a lot. We are aggressive. When we try to lose the ball, we try to win it back immediately. Those are all things that I like to do on the field as well. So I think stylistically, he's going to fit right in. And like you were talking about Dessler a little bit earlier, I think what happens when Dessler comes back is that, maybe that does free Gallagher up to play a little bit more wing, or maybe shifting. I do feel like Taylor, for all his kind of winginess as his preferred position, still does play centrally. And I do feel like he's going to play centrally a lot. I think especially now with Pereira being out, as he will be, I do see that he's almost going to maybe sub in and get those minutes that he was going to get. And that's how he would be deployed. And certainly if you have Dessler back, then you have Gallagher being, again, the Swiss Army knife that he can be. And that's not a bad thing. That is encouraging. I think May will be tough, but also maybe this team on the other side of May really is better. And we do see a kind of summer rebound, as it were. That is certainly possible. Again, a lot of projection today. Like we're at this kind of weird crossroads. I think we're 10 games in. We still are trying to figure out entirely what this team is. We know what's good, we know what's immediately flawed, but in terms of where it's going to go, how it's going to resolve, again, it's really all about the midfield right now to me. I think if the midfield gets the ball attackers in good places, eventually law of averages, that's going to come around. I do feel like they're going to score, but again, it's just this kind of question of when. And again, is it time for a sports psychologist maybe for these forwards? I'm not really kidding. Maybe that would help.
I feel like the thing that I like most about Robert Taylor is how good he is without Messi on the field. Guess what Austin doesn't have? A Messi on the field. He is a very capable player who, like a John Gallagher, like a Mikel Dessler, who is always your happy warrior, go along, get along guy who is wanting to try to help make things happen. And I think you're dead on. And again, this is projection and speculation on my behalf. I really think that what we keep pointing to is they have needed that connective piece in the midfield. And guess what? We don't have to guess that much, but there is a bit of a gaping hole in the midfield all of a sudden, thanks to the hardest crack that ever cracked off of Danny's foot, because the crack came from his hip flexor. That opening provides a great opportunity for a newly received player to prove himself. He's warm, he's ready, he is not coming out of cold storage. And I think that this is his opportunity to shine in a big way. And I enjoy that he has that story of having played at Q2 and had that experience. Brandon Vasquez has mentioned this too, of playing at Q2 in other stripes going, damn, this would be a nice place to play. Wow.
That same season.
That same
yeah, it was Cincinnati
season.
and Miami back to back.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was late stage Breck Shea too, as you recall. It was the Breck Shea fullback experiment, or the Breck Shea center back experiment, actually, which
the year of our
did
Lord,
not go well.
Breck Shea.
Oh man, memories. Yeah.
But yeah, he seemed like a real friendly guy, and you can be a real friendly guy, but can you put the numbers up? He can put the numbers up, and he's a hell of a nice guy. So it's good to have a twofer like that. Yeah, we will see, but I am optimistic about him.
Yeah, and I don't know. I imagine they probably roll him out as a sub for the first game. I don't think they necessarily start him right away unless he's really impressing people. He just got here, but I don't think it'll be long before, especially with the Pereira injury, I don't think it's long before he'll get some starts here.
I would say I would be surprised, but not too surprised if he starts on Saturday, because I believe he's capable of starting. That's why it wouldn't surprise me all the way. The surprise would be, okay, that means that they really are seeing something good, because it's not a pull the emergency break glass in case of. It is that they would do that because it feels like they could just drop him in.
If they want to just let him get his feet wet a little bit, they could put him in about the last 15, 20 minutes, and then he could start against El Paso on Wednesday in the Open Cup game. Get your groove on by playing against some USL players. That's a thing that might be possible. But then, of course, you have the cold water splash of at Cincinnati 3 days after that. That's the one that really worries me. That's the one that I think might be Vancouver 5-1 level hurty.
Let's back up to Minnesota. Shall we preview the weekend's events?
Sure.
So, what are we looking at, Phil? What do you think's going on here?
I'm going to get this up a little bit later. Wes Bernine, owner of the Blackheart, former Howler contributor, did a foreign exchange with him, got some questions answered, and they're really happy with Ramsey as a coach. And again, this is a team where fans are a little bit impatient. They're good, but they're not trophy level good. Their striker Bao is possibly out. He's questionable per the new injury report. Of course, Kip Keller is out. Unfortunately, we're not going to get a Kip Keller return to Q2 on the field, which is sad. And then there's, of course, Bongi Langwane, who has been playing as a wingback, which has been strange, but also obviously big attacking talent. They've got some good players on this team, and certainly they've been playing well together. They've had a little bit of rough go of it lately, including a 3-1 loss against Vancouver, not quite the 5-1 that Austin managed, but still a pretty resolute victory for Vancouver in that match. And the wheels came off on that one at the end. But Joseph Rosales, who's their other wingback, who had an incident, we'll say he has not been suspended for that incident, as we suspected that he might have been for that incident, unless we hear something late. But he is available per MLS's report. So we would probably expect both of them in that match, both Rosales and Longwane doing their wing back thing. Will Trapp is also still on this team. Will Trapp is still in the league. They're good, but they don't have any like super big obvious stars per se. They don't have anybody that's like really Messi or Suarez level, but they're yeah, I would say they're a good competent team with a lot of pieces that fit well together. They're no longer obviously the heliocentric number 10 team that they were when Babelo Reynosa was pulling strings for them, but still really good. Still a really good team overall.
I watched that Vancouver Minnesota match, and I don't have too much to add really, but for me, and I don't want to link this to our comments about Vancouver. Of this is about as depleted as you could think Vancouver would be before Austin had to go and play away against them. If they had to play away against Vancouver, this is the situation you'd want Austin to be in, and then the 5-1 happens. It may sound similar, but I don't mean it in the same way. I feel like losing 3-1 to Vancouver most recently is exactly the way that Austin would want to be facing Minnesota at home, especially against a Minnesota that is also looking at a rather stacked May, where they may look at this as, well, if we get a road point, okay, fine. Maybe they are not going to push Yeboah to get out there and kill it when he's questionable and go, we need to make sure that he's healthy for the rest of the month. And they hold him back as a result. That's stuff that, again, all we can do is speculate. We don't know for sure until we actually see the team sheet. But it feels to me like the reason that I'm bullish on this is that Austin knows that they need to start the month with a head of steam, and having 2 back-to-back home fixtures, one in league play, one in US Open Cup play, that is the best way to start ahead of steam, even if it gets interrupted, as I think a lot of us expect against Cincinnati. That's what has me very optimistic about this. Not to say that it's going to be an easy win, not to say that it isn't going to probably involve curveballs. Who knows? And I haven't looked at the ref assignments. It might be a chaos ref situation where completely bizarre things happen. And depending on what kind of a grudge a ref has against whoever happens to be wearing the armband, who might hand it off to somebody else, it'll be nice to have Brendan Hines-Ike back. There's some solid things in Austin's favor after some bruising and people maybe thought at worst a draw kind of situations in recent weeks. So yeah, I don't know. That's how I'm going into the weekend.
Okay. Yeah, just a couple more quick things to scare you about Minnesota, though.
Thanks.
Robin Lode is still really good, and he is on this team. Tani Oluwaseyi, the Canadian international, he has 5 goals and 3 assists on the season and is not even considered, quote unquote, their best forward. Oh yeah, and then they just got Julian Gressel too from Miami. It's gonna be a reunion of sorts, right? So you're gonna have two ex-Messi teammates who just got moved in the last week, potentially playing against each other for part of this. I don't know that Gressel is going to appear as a starter or even. And he's just kind of getting worked in, same as Taylor, but it makes that team a whole lot better. If you have Julian Gressel, you're a better team.
You had to go and mention the things that we hadn't mentioned yet. And so now I have to flip the coin to the other side like Two-Face and go, what if? They cannot underestimate those guys. And if Julian Gressel makes the team sheet, that's, I think, a reason to be concerned, because him playing in with their other players is not something that Austin has tape on, that sort of unexpected thing. The rest of the guys on their roster, they have plenty of tape on. They have plenty of, this is how these guys have been playing literally in recent weeks. But in the same way that Robert Taylor could be a surprise X factor, unexpected kind of thing to throw on even as a sub, they have a like for like in Julian Gressel. That's honestly the concern I have, that some people might think is maybe overblown, but I don't know. Never underestimate chaos in MLS. And
then you can, if you put Gressel in as a wing back, you can advance Longwane up late, and that's not a good recipe. Like he's tough. Yeah, it's, again, I think I'm just draw. I think the teams at home with Austin home are going to be fairly evenly matched. I do think that, maybe talent wise, I feel that maybe at this point right now, Minnesota's a tick better, but also if you have the home field advantage that Austin has in the crowd, I think that maybe even some things out a little bit. But yeah, so we're not in the predictions game, but I do think that, maybe this is a draw. You wanted to talk about one really cool thing that the club did before we get out this week. I open the floor to you to talk about the 4ATX Foundation and what they're doing.
Yeah, there's on occasion a mysterious invitation that we will get along the lines of there will be an announcement at the stadium by club
Mhm.
president Andy Loughnane. And that could be any number of different things.
Mystery.
And in this
Yep.
case, it was specifically that the 4ATX Foundation was announcing a $2 million investment in public soccer spaces alongside a bunch of different partners, Soccer Assist, who people in Los Verdes know Soccer Assist very well, Street Soccer USA, and the Austin Parks Foundation. And the $2 million investment is not the all-in investment. It's an initial investment to create free-to-use public soccer spaces across Central Texas. This is incredibly crucial for actually growing the sport in this country. It's one thing to have a top flight Division I soccer club that has an academy that, if you ask Roto Burrell, doesn't go quite young enough that they should have a U6. They should get them out of the diapers and into cleats. That is one part of it. Another part of it is just making the spaces available and accessible. Accessible is the big thing. It's not just that they exist, it's that they exist and not just be for the pay to play set, if you know what I'm saying. That's the thing, is making it so that kids can have the equivalent of YWCA, YMCA soccer like I did as a kid. You create that opportunity, and whether those kids go on to play professionally or not, it is something that becomes ingrained as one of the core sports of the country. But to get kids doing that, you've got to have fields on which they can play, and not just fields on which they can play and come back like they got chased by Swamp Thing, but fields where they can actually play, and fields where they don't even necessarily have grass, urban spaces, hardtop courts, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's a great initiative, and it's something that one would hope we're going to hear more and more about as the years go on. And knowing the comms department of the club, I have no doubt that we will.
For sure. Yeah, that's a great thing. Obviously, 4TX does a lot of great work, and it was good to see that. And Emmy was wondering when we were going to use the mystery soundbite again. So we now have the opportunity to do so, because yes, the club will occasionally get these surprises. And oftentimes it is sponsor related. They seem to be mounting up the sponsors. Ethan Finley apparently is doing his job and bagging the sponsorships. I'm going to assume it's Ethan, right?
Yeah, I love that everyone is assigning all credit to Ethan Finley. He is a one-man sponsorship booking machine. Like he's out there like pounding the pavement. He's hitting them up at the happy hours and just making it happen.
I think it's good for the lore. Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. I do too.
All right. Anything else before we turn it over to the people?
Oh, one last thing. So I sat in for Ben Olsen's post-game press conference at Houston last week.
Oh, yeah. That fun trip you went on.
Fun trip I went on. Oh, man, I'm so glad that I drove all the way out to Houston. And I wasn't doing it to be a troll. And I tried to qualify it after the fact in a way that, based on body language, I think Ben read that I did mean sincerely. But I let off asking, you've said in public comments before that one of the most valuable acquisitions that your club has made has been Josh Wolf. How did Josh Wolf factor into the win tonight? And he immediately took it as hostile based on the look I got from him. And I guess you're from Austin, huh? And then he proceeded to show that everyone should want a friend who gets their back the way that Ben Olsen gets Josh Wolf's back. That is how you present a defensive stance around your pal who lost his job and who you value and who you love and care for. And I think that is a totally upstanding, totally reasonable thing to do. I would have also appreciated it if he'd answered my question, which was a totally reasonable question to be asked.
It is a Ben Olsen press conference. So.
It was a Ben Olsen press conference. And so I told him to please say hello from me and Phil. And I just wanted him to say, what did you see in the run of play? What opportunities did you see to exploit? And he demurred. Josh Wolf did not want to talk about tactics, did not want to talk about how they found holes in the defense, and hilariously just threw off that, oh, they're missing guys. We're kind of thin too, with kind of a sly grin of knowing that they were much thinner than Austin was on the ground. Come on. So that was an interesting first tussle that I got to have with Ben Olsen. Yeah. But I gather that he understood by the end of his non-answer that I was being sincere about wanting him to have an opportunity to answer a question that was not asked in a hostile manner, that could have been asked in a hostile manner, but that I was very careful to not ask in a hostile manner. I did see Josh Wolf in the tunnel, though.
Yes,
And he was talking to a current Austin player I won't name because I do believe in a certain amount of privacy. But the reason I'm even mentioning this is I shook his hand and was like, hey, I just told Ben to say hi to you from me and Phil. Waited for them to be done talking and then just wanted to say a brief word of acknowledgement to him and wish him well. I wished Gavin Wolf well. He was there waiting for the family to go off to dinner, presumably. And he just iced me out. He just completely iced me out. And as many fair chances as I gave the guy, as much benefit of the doubt as I gave the guy, I honestly expected more out of him. So, Josh Wolf, welcome to the Imperial Star Navy.
Well, you're from Austin, aren't you?
I'm from Austin, aren't you?
Is maybe the operational thing. Yeah. Josh has probably left Austin far behind. So,
I think so.
He's got some memories, he's got some cricket shirts, but I don't think there's anything else that he's really relishing from that time. I think he's happy doing what he's doing, I would imagine. We obviously wish him well. We had good encounters with him over the years, but I know obviously the fan base has their feelings, sometimes flying behind a plane feelings, but it is what it is. It was an interesting journey. And I mean, I certainly learned a lot from the 5-6 years that we had him as the coach. So
yeah, admittedly, I had a much shorter time directly interacting with him. But I think at one point during that 2022 season, I want to say that he clocked me and remembered me as having been someone who he'd previously seen wearing a bunch of fan gear and a painted vest covered in patches and stuff like that. And I think that, and like we've actually talked about this before, I think that there is an assumption that he had based on some negative interactions that he didn't even want to get into. They were so unpleasant. And I'm not talking about like mischaracterization of things that might have been out in the open that people may have been aware of. I got the illusion that there were some situations that very sincerely made him concerned for the safety of his family more than himself. And I only wish I better understood that, because that is the bearing of doubt or standoffishness that I feel like I read off of him in that moment. I hope he's happy.
Right.
I hope Atlanta United enjoys their new coach, Josh Wolf, when they end up hiring him, because I think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Austin has a very firmly held rivalry with Houston on its own, and an additional layer to that Houston rivalry than before.
It is now enhanced. All right, we're going to leave it there. Thanks so much. Enjoy the game tonight, and we will talk next week about what happened in Open Cup, I guess, too, because that's there. We haven't even really said much about El Paso.
Phil, let's take just a slightly different tone of voice. What happened in Open Cup? Not what happened in Open Cup, I guess. What happened in Open Cup? The Cup.
I think they're going to win.
I think
so. So next week we will recap some things, and we will look forward. I am using air quotes here to going away to FC Cincinnati.
That is like the worst thing I've ever heard in the history of the 7 years that I've been on this planet.